All right, welcome to chapter 13. And we are quickly building up into the Civil War, which is where we're going to basically end this first semester of class. And chapter 13 is going to really deal with this sectional crisis that was going on in the United States during this time. Now, slavery's western expansion created a lot of problems for the United States from the very start. Battles really emerge over the westward expansion of slavery and over the role of the federal government in protecting the interests of slaveholders. Northern workers felt slavery really was suppressing wages and stole land that could have been used by poor white Americans to achieve economic independence. Southerners feared that without slavery's expansion, the abolitionist faction would come to dominate national politics, and an increasingly dense population of slaves would lead to a bloody insurrection and race war. Constant resistance from enslaved men and women required a strong pro-slavery government to maintain order. As the North gradually abolished human bondage, enslaved men and women headed north on an underground railroad of hideaways and safe houses. Northerners and Southerners came to disagree very sharply on the role of the federal government in capturing and returning these freedom seekers. While Northerners appealed to their states' rights to refuse capturing runaway slaves, white Southerners demanded a national commitment to slavery. Enslaved laborers, meanwhile, remained vitally important to the nation's economy, fueling not only the Southern plantation economy, but also providing raw materials for the industrial North. Differences over the fate of slavery remained at the heart of American politics, especially as the United States expanded. After decades of conflict, Americans North and South began to fear that the opposite section of the country had seized control of the government. By November 1860, an opponent of slavery's expansion arose from within the Republican Party. And during the secession crisis that followed, fears nearly a century in the making at last devolved into a bloody war. In section 2, we'll talk about sectionalism in the early republic. Now, this will take us back just a little bit, but it will quickly build back into where we currently are sitting in the time frame. Now, obviously, slavery's history had stretched back to antiquity. Prior to the American Revolution, nearly everyone in the world accepted it as a natural part of life. English colonies north and south relied on enslaved workers who grew tobacco, harvested indigo and sugar, and worked in ports. They generated tremendous wealth for the British Crown. That wealth and luxury fostered seemingly limitless opportunities and inspired seemingly boundless imaginations. Enslaved workers also helped give rise to revolutionary new ideas that, in time, became the ideological foundations of the sectional crisis. Now, English political theorists, in particular, began to kind of rethink the natural law justifications for slavery. They rejected this long-standing idea that slavery was a condition that naturally suited some people, and a new transatlantic anti-slavery movement began to argue that freedom was a natural condition of humankind. Revolutionaries also seized onto these ideas to stunning effect in the late 18th century. The United States, France, and Haiti, revolutionaries began to work on splintering the old order. Each revolution seemed to radicalize the next. Bolder and more expansive declarations of equality and freedom followed one after the other. Revolutionaries in the United States declared all men are created equal, all the way into the 1770s. French visionaries issued the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen in 1789. But the most startling development came in 1803, when a revolution led by the island's rebellious slaves turned France's most valuable sugar colony into an independent country, administered by the formerly enslaved. The Haitian Revolution really marked the earliest origins of the sectional crisis, which you do need to know for quiz and test purposes, that it was really the first. It helped splinter the Atlantic Basin into clear zones of freedom and unfreedom, shattering the long-standing assumptions that African-descended slaves could not also be rulers. Despite the clear limitations of the American Revolution in attacking slavery, the era marked a powerful break in slavery's history. Military service on behalf of both the English and the American Army freed thousands of slaves. Many others simply used the turmoil of war to make their escape. As a result, free black communities emerged, communities that would have continually reignite the anti-slavery struggle. And for nearly a century, most white Americans were content to compromise over the issue of slavery. but the constant agitation of black Americans, both enslaved and free, kept the issue alive. The national breakdown over slavery occurred over a long timeline and across a broad geography. Debates over slavery in the American West proved especially important. As the United States pressed westward, new questions arose as to whether those lands ought to be slave or free. The framers of the constitutions did a little, but not much, to help resolve these early questions. Article 6 of the 1787 Northwest Ordinance banned slavery north and west of the Ohio River. Many took it to mean that the founders intended for slavery to die out, as why else would they prohibit its spread across such a huge swath of territory? Debates over the framers' intentions often led to confusion and bitter debates, though, and actions of the new government left better clues as to what the new nation intended for slavery. Congress authorized the admission of Vermont in 1791 and Kentucky in 1792, with Vermont coming into the Union as a free state and Kentucky coming in as a slave state. Though Americans at the time made relatively little of the balancing act suggested by the admission of a slave state and a free state, the pattern became increasingly important. And by 1820, preserving the balance of the free states and slave states would be seen as an issue of national security. New pressures challenging the delicate balance again rose in the West. The Louisiana Purchase of 1803 more than doubled the size of the United States. Questions immediately arose as to whether these lands would be made slave or free. Complicating matters further was the rapid expansion of plantation slavery, fueled by the invention of the cotton gin in 1793. Yet even with the booming cotton economy, many Americans, including Thomas Jefferson, believed that slavery was a temporary institution that would soon die out. Tensions rose with the Louisiana Purchase, but a truly sectional national debate remained mostly dormant. That debate, however, came quickly. Sectional differences tied the expansion of plantation slavery in the West were especially important after 1803. The Ohio River Valley became an early fault line in the coming sectional struggle. Kentucky and Tennessee emerged as slave states, while the free states of Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois gained admission along the river's northern banks. Borderland negotiations and accommodations along the Ohio River kind of fostered a distinctive kind of white supremacy, as laws tried to keep blacks out of the West entirely. And you need to understand that Ohio actually had so-called black laws in 1803, which really foreshadowed the cultures of Indiana, Illinois, and the Jim Crow era South. And you need to know this for quiz purposes. These black laws often banned African Americans from voting, they denied black Americans access to public schools, and they made it impossible for non-whites to serve on juries and in local militias. Now, those are the most kind of recognizable ones. And again, you need to remember those for quiz and test purposes. But there was also a host of other restrictions and obstacles. The Missouri Territory, by far the largest section of the Louisiana Territory, marked a turning point in the sectional crisis. St. Louis, a bustling Mississippi River town filled with powerful slave owners, loomed large as an important trade headquarters for networks in the northern Mississippi Valley and the greater West. In 1817, eager to put down questions of whether this territory could be slave or free, Congress opened its debate on Missouri's admission to the Union. Congressman James Talmadge of New York proposed laws that would gradually abolish slavery in the new state. Southern states responded with a unanimous outrage, and the nation shuddered at an undeniable sectional controversy. Congress reached a compromise on Missouri's admission, largely through the work of Kentucky and Henry Clay. And part of the Missouri Compromise, and we've talked about this before, but you need to, again, remember this for quiz purposes. It accomplished three major things here. Maine would be admitted as a free state, Missouri came in as a slave state, and they tried to prevent future conflicts by making Missouri's southern border at 36 degrees and 30 seconds the new dividing line between, or 30 minutes, and the new dividing line between slavery and freedom. South of that line, running from Missouri to the western edge of Louisiana Purchase land, slavery could expand. North of it, which was still kind of unorganized territory, there would be no slavery. The Missouri Compromise marked a major turning point in America's sectional crisis. It exposed to the public just how divisive the slavery issue had grown, and the debate filled newspapers and speeches and congressional records. Anti-slavery and pro-slavery positions from that point forward repeatedly returned to points made during the Missouri debates. Legislators battled for weeks over whether the constitutional framers intended slavery's expansion, and these contests left deep scars. Even seemingly simple and straightforward phrases like all men are created equal were hotly contested all over again. Questions over the expansion of slavery remained unopened, but nearly all Americans concluded that the Constitution protected slavery where it already existed. Southerners were not yet advancing arguments that said slavery was a positive good, but they did insist at the Missouri debate that the framers supported slavery and wanted to see it expand. In Article 1, Section 2, for example, the Constitution enabled representation in the South to be based on rules defining an enslaved person as 3/5 of a voter, meaning Southern white men would be overrepresented in Congress. The Constitution also stipulated that Congress could not interfere with the slave trade before 1808 and enabled Congress to draft fugitive slave laws. Anti-slavery participants in the Missouri debate argued that the framers never intended slavery to survive the Revolution and in fact hoped that it would disappear through peaceful means. The framers of the Constitution never used the word slave. Slaves were referred to as persons held in service, perhaps referring to English common law precedents that questioned the legitimacy of property in man. Anti-slavery activists also pointed out that while Congress could not pass a law limiting the slave trade before 1808, the framers had also recognized the flip side of the debate and had thus opened the door to legislating the slave trade's end once the deadline arrived. Language in the 10th Amendment, they claimed, also said slavery could be banned in the territories. Finally, they pointed to the Due Process Clause of the Fifth Amendment, which said that property could be seized through appropriate legislation. The bruising Missouri debates ultimately transcended arguments about the Constitution. They became an all-encompassing referendum on the American past, present, and future. Despite the furor, the Missouri crisis did not yet inspire hardened defenses of either slave or free labor as a positive good. Those would come in the coming decades. In the meantime, the uneasy consensus forged by the Missouri debate managed to bring a measure of calm. The Missouri debate had also deeply troubled the nation's African Americans and Native Americans. By the time the Missouri Compromise debate, both groups saw that whites never intended them to be citizens of the United States. In fact, the debates over Missouri's admissions had offered the first sustained debate on the question of black citizenship, as Missouri's state constitution wanted to impose a hard ban on any future black migrants. Legislatures ultimately agreed that this hard ban violated the U.S. Constitution, but reaffirmed Missouri's ability to deny citizenship to African Americans. Americans by 1820 had endured a broad challenge, not only in their cherished ideals, but also, more fundamentally, to their conceptions of self. And this brings us to an end of the first two sections of Chapter 13.